What if I told you that the fiercest pitcher of a generation didn't grow up with a leather glove or manicured fields, but with dirt under his fingernails and a dream stronger than steel? That greatness can grow from poverty, from rejection, from the very streets where hope is sometimes the only currency. Pedro Jaime Martinez was born on October 25, 1971, in Managua, a humble and dusty neighborhood just outside Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic. Life there was vibrant, alive with rhythm and community, but economically, it was tough. Most families struggled to put food on the table. Electricity would come and go. But amidst all of it, baseball lived. It didn't require wealth, just a rock, a stick, and imagination. Pedro was the fifth of 6 children. His father, Pablo Jaime Abreu, worked as a janitor and mechanic. His mother, Leopoldina Martinez, was a seamstress and the rock of the family. Their home was small, but filled with love, discipline, and faith. Pedro's older brother, Ramon Martinez, was already a talented pitcher, strong, disciplined, and on the radar of MLB scouts. For Pedro, Ramon was more than a sibling. He was the model, the motivator, the unreachable standard. But Pedro was not just chasing his brother's footsteps. He was running with fire in his blood. As a child, Pedro didn't own a proper baseball glove. He improvised with cardboard, socks, or whatever he could find. When he wanted to build arm strength, he carried heavy buckets of water across the yard. When he wanted to improve his speed, he chased chickens. His ball was often a rock or crumpled paper. His first strike zone? A wall. His first fans? Neighbors who stopped to watch the little kid who threw harder than anyone his size should. He was skinny, barely over 5 feet tall in his early teens, and had a wiry frame that made many doubt he could ever become a professional athlete. But Pedro had something no scout could measure: hunger. The kind of hunger that doesn't go away after a meal. The kind that drives you when everyone else is sleeping. The kind that burns hotter every time someone says, "You're not enough." He followed Ramon everywhere, watched him train, listened to his stories, and mimicked every pitch. When Ramon signed with the Los Angeles Dodgers, Pedro's heart swelled with pride and fire. If they thought Ramon was special, they hadn't seen anything yet. By age 14, Pedro was throwing with deadly control and increasing speed. Local coaches were beginning to take notice, but even then, he was constantly told he was too small, too fragile, too emotional. He didn't look like a future ace. But Pedro didn't need to look the part. He was building the part with every throw, every sprint, every drop of sweat. At 16, everything changed. The Los Angeles Dodgers, already invested in Ramon, gave Pedro a chance. In 1988, he signed his first professional contract and stepped into a new world. He left home with barely anything in his suitcase and everything on his shoulders. He wasn't just playing for himself. He was playing for Managua, for his parents, for every barefoot kid who threw rocks at mango trees hoping for a miracle. He entered the Dodgers farm system with a heart full of hope and a fastball no one could ignore. But even there, the doubts followed him. He was good, but was he big enough? Durable enough? Mentally stable enough? They didn't know it yet, but they weren't just developing a pitcher. They were unleashing a revolution. Pedro Martinez arrived in the United States as a teenager with a fastball, a suitcase, and a fire that few could see, but none could match. He entered the Dodgers minor league system filled with confidence, but he quickly realized the game was bigger, faster, and harsher than he had ever known. Language was a barrier. So was culture. Pedro didn't speak much English. He missed home. The food was strange. The pressure was heavy. But none of that could stop him. He knew how to adapt. He had survived on concrete streets with no cleats. This was just another field. He quickly made a name for himself in the minors. Hitters didn't like facing him. He wasn't just fast, he was precise. He didn't just pitch, he attacked. His fastball touched the mid-90s, his curveball dropped off a cliff, and his changeup was already giving batters nightmares. But despite his success, the Dodgers didn't believe Pedro had the size or stamina to be a starting pitcher in the big leagues. They labeled him too small, too fragile, and placed him in the bullpen. They saw potential, but not a future ace. He was electric, but in their eyes, he wasn't built to last. In 1992, Pedro made his MLB debut with the Dodgers. He came out of the bullpen, showed flashes of brilliance, and then disappeared back into the shadows. They never gave him a real shot to start. And Pedro felt it. He was good, but he wasn't trusted. That lack of trust led to a decision that the Dodgers would come to regret forever. In 1993, Los Angeles traded Pedro Martínez to the Montreal Expos for second baseman Delino DeShields. At the time, the move made headlines, but not alarms. Pedro was talented, but unproven. DeShields was a solid infielder. It seemed like a fair trade. It wasn't. Montreal gave Pedro something Los Angeles never had: freedom. Freedom to start. Freedom to fail. Freedom to rise. The Expos didn't just acquire a pitcher. They unleashed a storm. Pedro arrived in Canada with a chip on his shoulder the size of the entire National League. He wanted to prove every scout, every coach, and every general manager wrong. And from the first moment he stepped on the mound in an Expos uniform, he did just that. He began his tenure as a starter, and the results were immediate. He had a presence on the mound, a fearlessness that intimidated hitters before he even threw a pitch. His delivery was compact and explosive. His stare burned through batters. And his command was surgical. In 1994, Pedro had a breakout season. He posted a 3.42 ERA and struck out 142 in just 144 innings. But more than the numbers, people began to see what Montreal saw: a future ace. His velocity was increasing, his command was tightening, his swagger was growing. But it was 1997 that changed everything. That season, Pedro Martínez unleashed one of the greatest pitching performances in modern baseball history. He threw 13 complete games, struck out 305 batters, and posted a 1.90 ERA. He became the first Dominican-born pitcher to win the Cy Young Award, baseball's highest honor for a pitcher. He did it all on a small market team with little media attention and limited support. But it didn't matter. Pedro had proven that he wasn't just good, he was generational. Still, Montreal was a team with financial limits. They couldn't afford to keep him. His value had skyrocketed, and he knew he was ready for a bigger challenge, a bigger city, a bigger spotlight. That spotlight was waiting for him in Boston. In late 1997, the Boston Red Sox traded for Pedro and signed him to a record-breaking 7-year, $75 million contract, the richest ever given to a pitcher at the time. Critics questioned the size of the deal. They wondered if Pedro could handle the pressure of Fenway Park, of the Boston media, of a fanbase starving for a championship. Pedro didn't just handle it. He turned it into his kingdom. The moment Pedro Martínez set foot in Boston, he could feel it in the air: tension, expectation, and history. The Red Sox hadn't won a World Series since 1918. The curse of the Bambino hovered over Fenway Park like a cold fog. Every season ended in heartbreak. Every hero eventually fell. But Pedro wasn't there to be part of history. He was there to rewrite it. From the very beginning of the 1998 season, Pedro announced himself to the American League like a thunderclap. He didn't need time to adjust. He didn't need to feel things out. He just needed the ball. And once he had it, he turned Fenway Park into his battlefield. That year, he struck out 251 batters and posted a 2.89 ERA. He was electric. His pitches moved like they were defying gravity. His fastball exploded, his curveball broke knees, and his changeup, his legendary changeup, was a thing of dark magic. It looked hittable, until it wasn't. Pedro didn't just throw pitches. He told stories. He set traps. He played chess against hitters who were barely playing checkers. But he also did something more important: he gave Boston hope. He gave them a reason to believe again. In 1999, he was no longer just dominant, he was mythical. That season, Pedro posted a 2.07 ERA, struck out 313 batters, and walked only 37. In a year when offensive numbers were exploding, when sluggers were breaking records with swollen muscles and juiced bats, Pedro was slicing through lineups like a laser. He wasn't just surviving the steroid era. He was owning it. One of his greatest performances came that summer, in front of the world, at the 1999 All-Star Game at Fenway Park. Pedro started the game for the American League and struck out 5 of the 6 batters he faced, including Barry Larkin, Larry Walker, Sammy Sosa, and Mark McGwire, 4 future Hall of Famers. In just 2 innings, he turned an exhibition into a statement. That year, he won the Cy Young Award, his second. But more than the stats, it was how he did it. He pitched with emotion, with swagger, with a chip on his shoulder the size of the Green Monster. He smiled, stared down hitters, and left fans gasping. Every 5th day, Boston paused. The city vibrated. People didn't just want to watch Pedro pitch, they needed to. Then came the year 2000, the season many call the greatest ever by a modern pitcher. Pedro posted a 1.74 ERA and a jaw-dropping 0.74 WHIP, the lowest in the history of Major League Baseball. He struck out 284 batters in just 217 innings. The next best pitcher in the league wasn't even close. He wasn't just beating hitters. He was humiliating them. Pedro became something more than a star. He became a symbol. For Dominicans, he was a national treasure. For Boston, he was a savior. For baseball, he was a reminder that art still existed on the mound, even in the age of brute strength. But it wasn't just dominance that defined Pedro. It was his fire, his presence. He didn't back down. He didn't apologize for his confidence. He pitched like he had something to prove, even when he was clearly the best. Reporters sometimes called him cocky. Opposing fans called him arrogant. But his teammates? They called him a warrior. And through it all, Pedro remained grounded in who he was. He never forgot Manoguayabo. He never stopped speaking Spanish in interviews. He never let go of the roots that gave him strength. In the span of 2 years, Pedro had transformed from a promising pitcher into the most dominant force in baseball. He carried a team, a city, and an entire country on his back, and did it all with a smile, and a fastball that danced like fire. But every fire eventually faces the wind. And for Pedro, the storm was coming. By the early 2000s, Pedro Martínez was no longer just a pitcher, he was a phenomenon. His name echoed through every stadium. Every batter knew the challenge ahead. Every broadcast waited for his starts like an event. But with that fame came pressure. With that dominance came conflict. And in the heart of the storm, stood Pedro, unafraid. The Yankees-Red Sox rivalry has always been one of the fiercest in sports. But in Pedro's era, it turned nuclear. Every time Boston and New York met, it felt like the weight of 100 years of hatred boiled over. Pedro didn't fear the Yankees. In fact, he relished the fight. He pitched with fire, stared down legends, and often backed it up with brilliance. But when the Yankees started pushing back, things got ugly. In 2003, during the American League Championship Series, tension reached its breaking point. After Pedro hit outfielder Karim Garcia with a pitch, the Yankees' dugout erupted. Words were shouted, warnings issued, then came the boiling moment. Don Zimmer, a 72-year-old Yankees bench coach, charged at Pedro during a bench-clearing brawl. In a moment that would become both iconic and controversial, Pedro calmly sidestepped Zimmer and gently shoved him to the ground. Cameras caught everything. The footage exploded across every network. Headlines ignited. The media feasted. Critics called Pedro reckless. They said he had crossed a line. But Pedro? He stood by his actions. He never backed down, not from hitters, not from managers, not from the noise. Behind the scenes, however, the weight was building. Pedro's arm, the flamethrower that had silenced MVPs, was beginning to wear down. The innings, the strikeouts, the adrenaline, all of it had a cost. His velocity started to dip. His command, once supernatural, began to falter on certain nights. And the media, always watching, started to whisper. Was he still the best? Was his body breaking? Pedro never denied the pain. But he never used it as an excuse. He still went out there every 5th day, carrying the hopes of a franchise that hadn't seen a championship in over 80 years. In 2003, after the infamous incident with Zimmer, Pedro pitched Game 7 of the ALCS in Yankee Stadium. The Red Sox were leading in the late innings. Pedro was dealing. Then, in the 8th, manager Grady Little left him in just a bit too long. The Yankees tied the game. Later, they won it in extra innings. Another season, another heartbreak, another year added to the curse. Pedro took the loss personally. But he didn't break. He spent the offseason rehabbing, working, resetting his mind. The media, once again, questioned his health, his attitude, his future. And Pedro, once again, responded the only way he knew how, by showing up and letting his arm speak. He returned in 2004 determined to finish what he had started in Boston. And this time, he wasn't alone. That year, the Red Sox had depth, heart, and one goal: redemption. And Pedro? He still had fire in his veins. He still believed, because legends don't walk away from storms. They walk through them. The year 2004 began not with promises, but with unfinished business. Pedro Martínez had seen the mountaintop, had stared victory in the eyes, only to watch it slip away the year before. The ghosts of Yankee Stadium had haunted him all winter. The media questioned his toughness. The fans demanded results. Boston had waited 86 years for a World Series title. And Pedro, now 32, knew this could be his last real shot to deliver one. The regular season was solid, but not dominant. Pedro finished with a 3.90 ERA and 227 strikeouts. Still effective, still dangerous, but not invincible. The fastball didn't crack the radar gun like it once did. The pain in his shoulder lingered longer. But the fire? It burned just the same. Then came the postseason. In the ALCS, Boston found itself facing the Yankees, again. And this time, the nightmare seemed worse. After 3 games, New York led the series 3-0. The Yankees had humiliated the Red Sox in Game 3, winning 19-8. Boston was one loss away from being swept. From another collapse. From another year of heartbreak. But this team refused. They fought back in Game 4. Then again in Game 5. The momentum shifted. The city held its breath. Then came Game 6, Pedro's turn. The game was in Yankee Stadium. The crowd was loud, bitter, and ruthless. Chants of, "Who's your daddy?" echoed through the stands, mocking Pedro's previous quote after a tough outing against New York. The media loved the drama. The fans thrived on it. But Pedro wasn't shaken. He wasn't intimidated. He took the mound knowing exactly what was at stake. And though he gave up a few runs early, he kept the game under control. The Red Sox offense, led by Big Papi, roared back. Boston won. The series was tied. Then, in Game 7, history was made. The Red Sox completed the greatest comeback in MLB postseason history, winning 4 straight games to dethrone the Yankees. Pedro didn't pitch in Game 7, but his presence, his fight, his survival through the storm, was part of the soul of that team. The curse was cracking. In the World Series, Boston faced the St. Louis Cardinals. Pedro started Game 3, and it was masterful. 7 shutout innings. Precision. Poise. Pedro didn't overpower anymore. He outthought, outwilled, outpitched. The Red Sox swept the Cardinals in 4 games. After 86 long years, Boston was finally champion. And Pedro Martínez was no longer just the heart of a fanbase. He was part of baseball history. He stood on the field that night, drenched in champagne, smiling with the joy of a man who had finally conquered fate. Not with brute force, not with luck, but with relentless fire. In that moment, the boy from Manogwayabo who once threw rocks as baseballs became a king on the biggest stage in the world. With a World Series ring finally on his hand and a city forever changed by his fire, Pedro Martínez had nothing left to prove to Boston. But greatness, for him, was never about resting on trophies. It was about continuing to compete, to challenge, to inspire. In late 2004, Pedro became a free agent. His arm was no longer what it had been, but his name still held weight. He signed a 4-year deal with the New York Mets for $53 million, bringing his legacy to the National League and to a team in desperate need of leadership, heart, and hope. Some wondered if he had anything left. But in 2005, Pedro silenced those doubts, at least for a while. That year, he pitched like a man reborn. He posted a 2.82 ERA with 208 strikeouts over 217 innings. He wasn't the flamethrower of 1999, but he was a master. He reinvented himself, not relying solely on power, but on wisdom, movement, and experience. His changeup remained devastating. His presence on the mound still commanded respect. And in New York, he found something new, a mentorship role. Pedro became the soul of the Mets clubhouse. He guided young pitchers. He brought laughter, culture, and confidence to a team that had lost its way. For a moment, it seemed like he might do for the Mets what he had done for Boston. But time, as it always does in baseball, started catching up. In 2006, the injuries returned. A torn calf, shoulder pain, then came the biggest blow, a full rotator cuff tear. Pedro had surgery and missed most of the 2007 season. And though he fought to return in 2008, it was clear, his body was breaking down. Still, Pedro never gave up. Even as his fastball dipped into the high 80s. Even as his innings were limited. Even as critics declared his career over. He pushed forward. Because the fire, though flickering, still burned. In 2009, at 37 years old, Pedro found himself without a team. Many assumed he had retired. But he hadn't. He trained in secret. He waited. He believed. And then, the Philadelphia Phillies called. The reigning National League champions needed depth. Pedro needed one last shot. It was the perfect final chapter. He joined the Phillies late in the season and immediately made an impact. In 9 starts, he went 5-1 with a 3.63 ERA. Fans embraced him. Teammates respected him. And for Pedro, it felt like a last dance with destiny. The Phillies made it to the World Series. And Pedro, still standing, still fighting, took the mound in Game 2 and Game 6 against the New York Yankees. The results weren't storybook. He gave up runs. The Yankees won the title. But the true ending had already been written. Pedro had returned to the biggest stage, not as the dominant force of the past, but as a warrior refusing to fade quietly. He pitched with pride, with experience, with heart. When he walked off the mound at Yankee Stadium in Game 6, he tipped his cap. And in that moment, the crowd, long his enemy, rose to their feet. Not for the loss, but for the legacy. After the 2009 World Series, Pedro Martínez quietly stepped away from the mound. There was no grand farewell tour, no official press conference, just a long silence, a pause filled with respect, reflection, and the realization that the fire had finally burned to its last spark. Pedro never needed to announce his greatness. It had already been carved into the history of the game. He officially announced his retirement in 2011, but by then, the baseball world already knew. His body, once explosive and defiant, had given everything. But his legacy? That was just beginning. Pedro finished his career with a record of 219 wins, 100 losses, an ERA of 2.93, and 3,154 strikeouts. One of the most efficient and dominant stat lines ever recorded. But numbers alone could never define what he meant to the game. He wasn't just a Hall of Famer, he was a symbol. A symbol for every Dominican child who played barefoot in the streets. For every Latin American player told they were too loud, too passionate, too different. For every underdog who dared to stare down giants. Pedro was more than statistics. He was swagger, poetry, and fire all in one. He proved that greatness didn't require size, it required heart. In 2015, that heart was formally recognized. Pedro Martínez was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown on his first ballot, with over 91% of the vote. A rare honor, a deserved one. His speech was unforgettable. He stood tall in front of the baseball world, not as a polished media product, but as himself. Raw, proud, Dominican, he spoke in English. Then he switched to Spanish. Because he wasn't just representing himself. He was representing millions. He carried the Dominican flag on his shoulders, not just in fabric, but in spirit. And when he said, "I'm here not because I was the biggest, but because I had the biggest heart," the crowd erupted. Cooperstown had never seen anything like Pedro, and perhaps it never will again. His plaque stands among legends, but his soul lives far beyond the walls of the hall. In schools, in barrios, in training fields across Santo Domingo, Pedro's story is taught not just as a baseball journey, but as a lesson in belief. He has since become a mentor, a broadcaster, and a public voice for Latin American players. He defends his people. He champions young talent. He tells the truth, always with a smile, often with fire. In Dominican culture, Pedro is not just a hero. He's a national treasure, a living reminder that even the most forgotten corners of the world can produce light strong enough to blind the doubters. Statues have been raised, fields have been named after him. But his greatest monument is invisible, carved into the hearts of millions who now believe that they, too, can be more. Pedro Martínez was never perfect. He was emotional. He made mistakes. He broke the mold. But in doing so, he built something greater than perfection: legacy. In the game of baseball, pitchers come and go. Some last a season, others build a career, but a few, just a few, ignite something far beyond the box score. Something you don't measure in wins or strikeouts. Something that burns in memory, in culture, in soul. Pedro Martínez was one of those few. He didn't rewrite the rules, he broke them. He didn't fit the mold, he exploded it. He wasn't built to dominate, but he did it anyway. For over a decade, Pedro stood at the center of the baseball world with fire in his eyes and courage in his veins. He faced legends, silenced giants, and stared down ghosts in Yankee Stadium. He danced on the mound with joy, rage, and confidence. And he never, ever bowed to pressure. But Pedro's greatness was never just about what he did between the lines. It was about how he did it. And why. He represented something bigger than baseball. He was the voice of the overlooked. The spark for the underestimated. A Dominican kid who dared to dream in a world that told him, no, at every step. He never forgot where he came from. Never turned his back on his people. He wore his country on his back every time he stepped on the mound. And when he struck out his final batter, he didn't just walk off as a legend. He walked off as a symbol of what is possible. Because Pedro Martínez wasn't just a pitcher. He was a revolution in motion. A flame that refused to be extinguished. A heartbeat for every fan who ever hoped for more. In the years since his retirement, Pedro's legend has only grown. His words now inspire. His smile now comforts. And his story, told from dugouts to schoolyards, reminds new generations that greatness has no height requirement, no perfect resume, no fixed path. It just needs one thing: a heart big enough to carry the weight of dreams. Pedro once said, "I didn't need to throw 100 to be great. I just needed to know who I was, and never stop being it." And he never did. He was the fire in Boston. The pride of the Dominican Republic. The pitcher that made MVPs look lost. The voice that made silence listen. The heart that never quit. So as the lights fade, and the roar of the crowd becomes a memory, one truth remains. Pedro Martínez will never be just a chapter in baseball history. He is, and forever will be, a heartbeat of the game.